Ladies and gentlemen, children, good evening. And I'd like to start this off by saying this was not easy. Getting here today to this moment was not easy. See, I learned about resilience when I was in elementary school, when I didn't even know what it was. But what I did know was that my father was black from the deep south. My mother was Jewish from Brooklyn. And I went to public school by day and Hebrew school in the evening. And that might not sound like a big deal, but to me, I was very different. And I felt very different from the people around me. And it bred this small and quiet insecurity within me that grew. And I guess I was a little bit resilient early on because I never told my parents, oh, I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go. I didn't say that. I decided to act out, to try to fit in, to try to look for the social acceptance I was longing for. And so that came in the form of being the class clown. I loved lighting people up. I loved making people laugh. It made me feel like I was just like everybody else. And I remember as a little kid when it was time to get report cards. And we would get the report cards in a sealed envelope, and I would hand it to my father. He was a very serious, loving man, very serious man. He would open the report card and look at the grades and have this long face of disappointment. And he would then pass it to my mother, who looks at the grades and she just starts crying. And then he would hand it to me and I would look at it and I would see that my name was correct, my address was correct, my ID number was spot on. But all the grades were completely wrong. I just saw C's, D's, and F's, and then I got comments like, Jeff is a major distraction in class. Jeff is not fulfilling his potential. I saw this and I was shocked. I said, Mom, Dad, we're going to the school tomorrow. We need to see the guidance counselor. He made a terrible mistake. And my father would just look at me. He wasn't laughing. I was laughing. He wasn't laughing. And he would say, Jeff, how do you expect to get different kinds of grades when you know what you're doing in school every day? You know what you're doing day in and day out. I just got 4 phone calls from your teachers in the past 2 weeks. Why are you the only one that's surprised? And see, this didn't stop in elementary school. This went from elementary school to middle school to high school. And by high school, I mastered being the class clown. I had it down to a science. Kids were hoping to be in my class. The kids were checking their schedule. Am I in Jeff's class? Because if I'm in Jeff's class, I know I'm going to get a show. Because he disrupts the beginning, middle, and the end of the lesson. I got so good at making people laugh. I got so good at being the joker that I thought it was me. I fooled myself. And I thought that that's who I really was. And I thought that that's all I was. You see, I was being extremely resilient, very persistent in blocking the real me out. I was being extremely resilient and extremely consistent in blocking out my own personal greatness. I was trading in my own academic success for other people's approval. There's an old African proverb that says, if there's no enemy within, the enemy outside can do us no harm. And my enemy was within. I was insecure due to my background. I thought I was too different. I thought if people knew, they wouldn't like me. I thought if people really knew how smart I was, they wouldn't like me. See, they saw me joking around, but they didn't know my mother has me up until 11 o'clock at night doing vocabulary. I'm writing in vocabulary workbooks until late at night. I'm studying and reading civil rights leaders, not to be trained to be an activist, but to study greatness, but to study great people. But I never showed that. And this even continued on into college. And I'm in college, let me tell you everybody, I'm in college having a great time. I loved college. I loved it. And I remember one day, I got a phone call from my mother. I pick up the phone, and I say, "Hey, Mom, how are you?" And she's crying on the phone. And she says, Jeff, what are you doing up there?" I said, "Mom, I'm sleeping. I'm actually sleeping right now." And she said, "I just got a letter from the Dean of Students that said they're going to kick you out of college this semester for failing 4 consecutive semesters." I said, "Mom," I had the same excuse from my mother all the time. I said, "Mom, don't worry, I got this. There's more time. I can hand all the work in, I promise." And she just cried. And I said, "Mom, next time, I love you, but just please call me back a little bit later. It's like 7 in the morning." And she said, "That's your problem. It's 3 p.m. Get up." I said, okay. I hung up the phone. And it was such an interesting moment. As soon as I got that call, 2 extremely other powerful things just happened to happen. One of them was that I enrolled in a class called American Literary Traditions. And I ended up reading this essay by Ralph Waldo Emerson called Self-Reliance. And of course, when I was a child, my parents used to always affirm me. They used to always tell me, "Jeff, believe in yourself, stand tall, stand proud." But for some reason, I never believed them. I just thought they were doing what parents do, telling me good stuff, telling me nice stuff. I didn't really believe it. And when I'm reading Self-Reliance, he said, trust yourself, love yourself, because when you do that, you're able to give the world your gift. Emerson wrote, trust yourself, and only then can you tap in to your greatness. And for some reason, at that moment in time, the Japanese call it satori. I had this moment of awakening within. And I realized how much time I was wasting. And I realized that I was not being who I'm destined to be. I'm not being who I truly am. I'm not trusting myself. Because if I trusted myself, I wouldn't care what other people think. I wasn't trusting myself at all. And I was so blown away by this. I'm 20 years old, and I'm asking myself, why didn't I read this at 12? Why didn't I read this at 13, 14, 15? And I realized that was to have an impact on people the way this text had an impact on me. And at that moment in time, I said, I'm going to be a teacher. That's it. No ifs, ands, or buts. And I'm going to expose children to work like this, work that moved me, so I can be a catalyst in their lives. And I had that, and let me tell you, I had that epiphany at the perfect timing. Because 3 days later, I had a meeting with the Dean of Students. And his name was Mr. Clarence Weatherspoon. And he said, Jeff, can you please explain to me these C's, D's, and F's for the past 4 semesters? And I said, I'm sorry, I was just trying to figure some things out. I know that there's some more time. I can still hand the work in. There's more time. And I got to speak, and I spoke to him about Emerson and how I want to be a teacher and how I want to provide change. I want to inspire and empower and educate children so that they can tap into who they really are earlier. He said, Jeff, that sounds great, but the numbers don't lie. Your grades are terrible. I said, all right, okay, I get it, I understand. He said, Jeff, you have 1 semester left to get your act together or you'll be out of this college for good. And at that time, I realized that I was viewing time completely wrong. And I think that many of us are viewing time completely wrong. See, I used to see time like a clock, like a circle. It just keeps on going and going and going. And at that time, I realized time is really like an hourglass. It runs out. And I realized now I'm going to approach my studies, my work, working on myself with a sense of urgency. I had 1 semester to make it happen. And I did. At that time, I moved out of my apartment. I was living with about 4 friends, and we had a great time together, but I knew I had to leave and go somewhere else. I started connecting with other students in my class and in my major who were getting A's and B's. And I started learning how they approach their studies, what they do with their free time, how they build relationships with the professors. And I was blown away. I thought they should give a class just on what these kids are teaching me. And it was amazing. And I ended up getting just under 4.0s for the last 2 semesters. So needless to say, I stayed in school and I was aware of all of these wonderful principles I was learning. Like 1, treat your goals and your progress with a sense of urgency. You don't get any more time. Right now is when you start the work. 2, I learned to build relationships with positive people, people who can help me. Some of those people who tried to kick me out of university, I'm still in contact today, and I love them because they helped wake me up. And the 3rd thing was I had to move, like you just heard me tell before. I had to move and get my own apartment. I had to spend some time by myself to define myself, to learn who I really am and who I really want to be. So I carry these principles on now into graduate school. So everything I learned unintentionally, through chance, through life, through the lessons of life, through the lessons of my failures and mistakes, I was able to apply very intentionally in graduate school. And I started getting grades that I've literally, you can ask my mother, never got before. Never got before. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And I was in a group. We were all aspiring teachers, all aspiring New York City educators. And upon graduation, we continued to meet. And we agreed, we said, we're going to meet once a month to discuss the job hunt. We were all very afraid of the job hunt because in the newspaper it said there are no jobs out there. It's a hiring freeze. This is the time to go back to school. And I'm like, I just did 7 years of school. I'm not going back to school. I need a job. So I started applying to schools, many schools, 5 schools, 10 schools. And I kept on hearing the same thing. We don't have any money to pay you. You have no real teaching experience. You don't have the qualifications, even though I had a master's. So I did what I thought made sense. I became a substitute teacher in Washington Heights, New York, at George Washington High School, one of the largest high schools in New York City. And I worked under Dr. Juan Alvarez. And every day, Dr. Juan Alvarez would walk past the classroom I was subbing in. He called me every day. And he would peek in to the room to see what was going on. And we would just wave, hey, everybody wave at Dr. Juan Alvarez. Kids would all wave. And one day he pulled me aside and he said, Mr. Moore, I said, Dr. Alvarez, explain to me, what are you doing in there? You have kids sitting down who never sat down before. I've never seen Tommy hold a pen before. He's holding a pen and he's writing. What are you doing in there? The students are sitting close together. They're engaged. There are no cell phones out. They're focused. And I said, well, Dr. Alvarez, to be honest with you, I told him that if we can work together and master this material, I'll tell you some of my stories from college. And he looked at me and he said, brilliant. I said, yeah. I said, Dr. Alvarez, that's really all I got. That's really all I got. I'm substituting. I didn't know what to do. I got some stories. He said, keep telling them. I said, I can do that. And so I'm working there every day, and after work, I'm applying to these schools, and I'm up to 10 schools. And I'm applying to 5 schools. They tell me, these 5 schools, we don't have any money. We're in a deficit. We can't pay you. All right, thank you. Next 5 schools, you don't have the qualifications. You have a master's, but we want somebody who speaks 6 languages. I said, I don't speak English. A little bit of Spanish. Actually, I failed Spanish 4 times, so I don't even speak Spanish. And then, 5 more, I'm up to 25 schools, 5 more schools. You have 0 years of teaching experience. And I said, no, I have teaching experience. I'm a substitute teacher. And they just looked at me. I guess my substituting experience didn't really count in their book. And so now I'm meeting back, and I've applied to 25 schools, and I followed up in person. I applied in person and followed up in person. So most of my rejections came in person. And I developed a very thick skin in doing that. And I remember meeting up with a bunch of my old classmates. And we were all discussing the job hunt. And none of them had jobs. And some of them were lucky enough to be in a position where they said, you know what? I'm going to take a year off. I'm not going to go right to work. I'm just going to take a year off. Other people, they went into sales, or through their family, they were able to get a job. And I knew that they were going to hate that job in about a year or two, but I couldn't tell them that. And then me, I didn't have any of that. I couldn't just go travel the world. Couldn't do that. And my family, they couldn't hook me up with a job. But I had something that they didn't have. I had purpose. I knew that when I read this transformative literature when I was 20, that I was committed to that course. And I was committed to being that guy that's going to inspire children. I had purpose. And I knew that it was coming. I knew that this job was just a matter of time. So I kept going, and now I'm up to 30 schools. Same thing. No, 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 no. Same thing. Same song. And one day, I'm leaving George Washington High School, and I just had an amazing conversation with Dr. Alvarez about life, opportunity, growth, just, outstanding conversation. And I'm walking over to the subway, and I get a phone call. And I answer the phone. Hello. Hi, this is Miss Simmons. Is Mr. Moore there? I'm like, yes, hey, this is Mr. Moore. She said, hey, Mr. Moore, I'd like to make you an offer. I said, offer? I don't want a credit card. I don't want a card. An offer? She said, no. This is the Academy for Social Action. You just did a demo lesson on the poem by Tupac Shakur called A Rose That Grew from Concrete. I said, oh, yes, I remember, yes, this is Mr. Moore, yes, this is me. You got the right, I still don't want a credit card, but you got the right guy. And she said, I'd like to make you an offer to be our 7th grade English teacher. And I said, 7th grade English teacher? Me? I was just rejected by 30 schools. Yes, I'll take the job. But Miss Simmons, I have to ask, why me? She said, Jeff, I just got off the phone with Dr. Juan Alvarez. He said you were the greatest substitute he's ever seen. He's been in the New York City Department of Education for over 40 years, principal for over 20. He said he's never seen somebody come in the room and have an impact like you. I said, all right, thank you. I'll see you in September. And when I hung up the phone, I had this just feeling of joy. I was floating, and I felt like all of the work, all of the pain as a kid in college, all these rejections. I was getting rejected so many times by so many educated people, so many powerful people. I almost believed it. I almost believed that I wasn't that person. I almost believed that, who am I to help these children? But then when I had those thoughts, I had to refocus my focus to my purpose. And it was at that moment that I knew all these things I was working on myself, surrounding myself with powerful and positive people, approaching what I want with a sense of urgency. It all just, it worked out. It took time, but it worked out. And it was at that moment that I learned what resilience was. Again and again and again, of course, without a shadow of a doubt, that is resilience. But in my life, in my scenario, the lessons that I learned from trying and trying again. See, I couldn't just try the same thing over and over again. That wouldn't work. I had to apply what I was learning. I had to apply what I was learning as I moved forward. And it was only then that things started to work out. In the dictionary, they say that resilience is when you're stretched, twisted, pulled, distorted, but you're still able to return back to your truest form. And it was also at that moment that I felt like I was still that same little boy who just wanted to light people up. And now, instead of being, there's a little shift. Now, instead of being the joker and the funny guy, I'm able to do it through education, through empowerment, through developing self-esteem. And it was just a very powerful moment in my life. And I truly believe that anyone who is working towards anything that has a vision, that has faith, that has purpose, that's surrounding themselves with people who can nourish them, it's possible. It's possible. In whatever stage I'm in my life, pursuing whatever goal that it is that I want, I just think back to these stories and I remind myself, it's possible.